Hello, good morning to all. Welcome. My name is Daniela, and I will be your host for our first benefit webinar on the transport infrastructure funding and business models, the characteristics and implications for project feasibility and outcomes. Just before proceeding, just a general introduction to the benefit project that is funded under Horizon 2020. Well, our project is framed by two general questions. The first one is how to mobilize private financing and funding so that effectively we are providing value to all the stakeholders. And then how can we use the existing experience and the state of art that we have from research and innovation, looking for a better design for such future investments as well as to support the current ones. To answer these questions, Benefit takes an innovative approach by analyzing the funding scheme within an interrelated system. What this means is that we have funding schemes that are deemed to be successful or not, depending on the business model that generates those schemes, as well as the stakeholders and the policy context. But the performance of the business model is also affected by the implementation typology and the transport mode context. Then, this can be met successfully or not by a certain financing scheme. Then we have to count that relations between actors are partially described by a governance model and the contractual arrangement. Today, we are focusing on three of the typologies that we are working out in Benefit. And I welcome our three speakers, João Bernardino from TIF in Portugal, that will talk us about how the funding schemes affect the transport project viability and performance.
Sandra.
Atina, our project coordinator from the University of Asia, that will talk us about the transport infrastructure business model. And soon, from the University of Antwerp, that will present us the implementation program. Just in brief, the rules for the webinar are easy. We have 1 hour. We have 3 presenters. You are welcome to written your questions using the chat of the menu. And by the end of the session, we will reserve some time for questions and answers. So now, enjoy, learn, and share with Benefit. I will pass the floor now to João, that will start by presenting the Well, you are now the host for the following minute.
Good morning. Let me share my presentation. Okay, can you see it?
We're sorry, your entry is not valid, or the meeting has not started yet.
Yes.
Please re-enter your access code or meeting number followed by the pound sign. Join the conference.
So, yes, also
Okay. I will start then. So I will speak a little bit of what we have been doing in this first part.
We're sorry, your entry is not valid, or the meeting has not started yet.
Funding
Please
schemes
re-enter your access code or meeting number followed by the pound
trying
sign.
to answer one of the final goals of benefits of how they affect, together with a number of other factors, how they affect project viability and performance, and how can we better advise decision makers on
Thanks
this.
for using WebEx.
So much of this first work has been to identify the elements
Has left the conference.
to identify the elements related to funding that would allow us to assess this project's feasibility and performance. Okay. I'm trying to skip the slide, and this is where we are in the scope of the whole benefit assessment. The benefit project is looking at various aspects of a project, including the funding scheme, and here we are looking in particular to the aspects of the funding scheme that might affect the performance, the economic, environmental, social, and institutional aspects, as well as the feasibility of the project as a whole. So regarding funding schemes generally, and this is true for, well, generally any sector in any field of the transport sector, we have four big groups of funding schemes. First one is funding by public budget, which is to say taxpayers' money. The second one is the users who use the infrastructure and the service and who pay for using it, and by that they are funding the project. And these two are the most important ones. In virtually every transport project, its main funding source is either the public budget or the users. But there are other ways to fund and which can compensate possibly for lack of funding, and we divided them into elements. One is other revenues collected within infrastructure, which can be, for example, commercial activities or advertising, or other revenues, other services provided within the infrastructure. And looking outside the scope of the project, we can also think of other sources, like earmarking from other revenues. And it is used, for example, in the scope of road transport, in earmarking of the fuel tax to pay directly for infrastructure projects.
We're sorry, your entry is not valid, or the meeting has not started yet. Please re-enter your access code or meeting number followed by the pound sign. Has joined the conference.
As a way to fund projects which
has left the conference.
Further funding. This, like I said, is valid for any transport mode, but of course there are variations.
Your entry is not valid, or the meeting has not started yet. Please re-enter your access code or meeting number followed by the pound sign.
There are also variations across different contexts, local contexts, and of course, more generally, the business model that is applied in the project. So speaking about how these funding schemes might affect project feasibility and performance, we will cover a few conditions for such feasibility and performance related to funding schemes. The first one is pretty obvious. There will only be financing available for the project, for the construction of the infrastructure or the operation. This financing will only be available if there is some funding to back it. This is true either we're speaking of publicly financed projects or privately financed projects. In the case of public financed projects, the funding is taxpayers' money, but it must be available, and it is more and more scarce in Europe, and that's why there is an increasing search for alternative ways of funding transport projects. For the private sector, it's also pretty obvious that any private entity will only be available to finance a project if there is a good expectation that there will be enough funding to back it. So if this condition is not met, there is simply no project. It's not possible to happen. So the first thing for project feasibility is to find enough funding. We may have a project which is fully sound in terms of a social cost-benefit analysis, but if we don't find enough funding for it, it won't happen. So we need cost coverage. The funds must cover the costs of the project so that it is feasible. The second element is related to the fact that the project is long. It will happen for many years, and the funding sources related to that project are, in most cases, only happening during the project time frame, whereas most of the financing of the project, particularly when it involves construction, needs to happen at the beginning of the project.
We're sorry, your entry is not valid.
Of course, we're dealing with the future, and the future is uncertain.
Has joined the conference.
So we cannot know for sure what will be the future revenues generated by the project. So we have a risk. And the second condition is that this risk of income generated by the project must be acceptable, must be within the boundaries acceptable by the financing entity. Otherwise, again, the project will not happen. This is a subcondition of the first one because we're mostly dealing with a specific type of cost, which is the cost of risk. A third element related to project feasibility and performance is related to this image. This image is very lively in the minds of the Portuguese people, like I am. It happened 20 years ago in a bridge. It was the only bridge in Lisbon. And the government decided to increase the toll in that bridge to pay for the construction of another bridge that was going to be constructed. This generated major protests, and it has a huge political impact even in the following elections. And finally, the government drew back on its intention to earmark its revenues and just solve the issue through public subsidies. But this had a major impact nationally, really. So what we are speaking about here is public acceptability. Will the voters be happy about the way the government decides that the project will be funded? So there are several reasons why there might be an acceptability of
Thanks for using WebEx.
The first one, which is related to the example that I just gave, is that the agent that is providing the funding does not directly benefit from the infrastructure. So this will tend to make him or her pretty much angry. Another common situation is where we try to solve a previously unpriced ground. People get used to not paying, and once they are asked to pay, that might generate a lot of unacceptability. If the application of the revenues is not clear or is allocated when it's not recognized as good, is also a major reason, and the best example is in congestion pricing within cities, which becomes automatically more acceptable to people once the revenues generated by it are allocated to things perceived as something good, like, for example, public transport. And finally, if the funding scheme is perceived as inequitable, which generally it is because it's similar to a tax that is equal to the poor and the rich, so it is regressive. So third condition is public acceptability, public and political acceptability. The funds must be socio-politically acceptable. The fourth element that I will refer, I will give also an example. This is in the south of Portugal, in the beautiful Algarve. And you can see two roads crossing the Algarve. The gray road is the old road, and it was famous for a lot of congestion and a lot of accidents. It was actually the most dangerous road in Portugal. And so the government decided to construct a motorway next to it, and it happened. The motorway was funded by taxpayers' money. So that's how the PPP was remunerated. But with the economic crisis, the government had no money any longer to pay for it. So it had to toll it. Those black things you see there are the tolls, the points where the tolls are put. And this had a very negative effect. And this effect was that a motorway that, of course, many people started to use and which had a very good impact. It increased travel time, it decreased travel time, it reduced a lot the accidents that were happening in the other roads. But after the government decided to put a toll in it, a lot of people started using the old road again, even though it provides them a worse service and is more dangerous. So this is a huge inefficiency, and it happens whenever pricing in competitive infrastructure does not follow the same principles in both infrastructures. There are market distortions, and in Portugal we made a study which has shown that this kind of effect, for each €1 collected in the toll revenues, there were 40 cents lost in economic safety and environmental costs due to this distortion. So this is called the allocative efficiency. And allocative inefficiency happens whenever the available infrastructure is not being used in an efficient way. We have an asset, which is a great asset, but is not being used by the users. So it's a waste. Another form of allocative inefficiency is when we don't have the internalization of costs. Either we're speaking, particularly when we're speaking of congestion, there should be an optimal price which will regulate congestion and make the demand and the supply meet in an optimal way. And if it is not the price that we have in infrastructure, then we have inefficiency. The same is true for internalization of other external costs like environmental costs. So we're speaking of both things which converge into something that is the theory that says that social marginal cost pricing is the type of pricing in transport and any other sector that delivers an optimal use of the infrastructure and the vehicles, socially optimal use. So the fourth condition is that for a good performance of the project, we should have efficient pricing. Infrastructures and vehicles are allocated efficiently if social marginal cost pricing is applied. The final condition that I will mention is also related to behavior. The previous one, we are using a price to deliver an optimal behavior from the users. But this is also true of the project operator. The funding that is being delivered to the project operator is delivering incentives. And if it doesn't deliver the proper incentives, there would not be proper service or a proper infrastructure. So funding influences behavior of the operator, and the fifth condition is that we need to have the right operational incentives. So the sources of income of the project operator should be adequate. So I presented 5 conditions. These were the ones that we regarded as the most relevant ones regarding the impact of funding the project, transport project feasibility and performance. And the question is, can we conciliate them? Is there any type of funding, any funding scheme that will deliver an optimal set of these conditions? Well, only by chance will that happen. We will have to be very lucky to find such a funding scheme. Some funding schemes are better for some conditions, other funding schemes are better for other conditions. And for example, if we want at the same time cost coverage and efficient pricing, the efficient pricing may not enable cost coverage. So having the state as an intermediate between the funding and the project operator is a way to make this kind of mediation and to try to solve some of the inconsistencies that there are between those conditions. Some of them are possible to solve, but never all of them, never. We're just improving the situation. But how is the question? What is the best way to do it, considering all the goals that we have in mind? And this is, of course, extremely complex. The benefit matching framework that we are working on now together in Benefit is doing this. We are doing this for the funding schemes as well as for a set of other dimensions for which 2 of them you will hear in this webinar. So this is, as I described you, is our starting point for developing the benefit matching framework in the scope of funding. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, João, for this interesting presentation. While transferring the moderation to Athena to continue with the slides, I just would like to remember you that at any time you can use the chat to pose your questions so that we have a good set of questions and answers for the end of the session. Athena, I'm transferring to you the moderation role.
Good morning, everyone. I hope I am heard. Just to make life easier for everyone and make it more audible, it would be best if everyone shuts off their microphones. That means the little microphone that you see on your screen has to turn red. Okay. So, the presentation concerns the transport business models. So today we'll be looking at what is, or in our case, we describe as a transport infrastructure business model, what we found, and do these models enhance or improve our chances of better performance? Going to the business models in the benefit, you understand that we are looking at this part of the conceptual model. Joao previously presented the funding scheme, and later on, Koen will be presenting the implementation context. As you understand, the business model is central to what happens because it will describe all the revenue streams that a funding scheme can pick up. It will match a financing scheme that will finance the business model, the transport infrastructure we're discussing. The implementation context and what the transport modes we're talking about will define a number of parameters and activities in this process, while the governance scheme developed through the various procurement and contractual arrangements will define how all actors in this setting will be behaving. Looking at the business model, we start off with a very standard approach. What you see on your screen is the Osterwalder canvas, which describes business models, the value proposition being central, and the right-hand side looking at customers, and so ending up with revenues, and the left-hand side looking at what effort or what resources we need to put into here in order to get this value proposition. So in effect, we're looking at two parts, if you like, to a business model. We're looking at the cost structure and the revenue stream. Being more specific, looking at key partners or the activities or people who come into this, we're looking at the capability to manage construction, operation, and maintenance with respect to the activities that we're considering. We are looking at potential successful adoption of innovation, because this would lead to efficiency in construction, operation, and maintenance. We are also looking at life cycle planning. When it comes to the revenue part, then we're looking at the activities of the services that the actual infrastructure is offering, plus which other activities, which other items we can add to our value proposition in order to improve it. And in this case, which other customers, users, in our case, can we attract? Today's presentation will be looking at which other activities and which other customers. So basically, if you look at it, what can we do? And literature and practical life has led us to this listing. We can add brownfields included in operation. An example, the Ionia Azov in Greece. And you can have extreme situations where the brownfield is on the one side of the country and the greenfield, the new construction that is on the eastern side of the country. One understands very, very well that the brownfield section is included in the contract. This is a PPP, in order to support revenues and income. You can describe and you can build with other transport infrastructure. In this case, you are reducing the total cost. It adds more complexities. An example from our case database is the Complibahn in the Netherlands, where rail and motorways are described under the same tunnel. You can have commercial activities included, and airports, for example, airports are a good example. For example, the Athens International Airport, this is a PPP. In 2013, this is our heart of the crisis, made 15 million passengers and 4.9 million visitors. So one understands that a lot of the income comes from this additional activity coming from just visitors and not passengers. This same process is applied now in the Hague New Central Station under development, which includes not only the central station renovation, but a development plan for the entire area around it under one contract. And this is a public funded project. So it could include other non-transport activities like energy, and obviously other that right now one cannot think of, but obviously other activities that add to the revenue stream of these projects. One understands that some are cases that can improve the traffic, while some will include revenue sources and potential traffic. This is a listing of looking at the cases in the benefit database. Not all, these are 69 out of the 85 cases. And one sees, for example, let's see what we find in our cases. We find that commercial activities over 10% appear in very few cases. We find that bundling during construction with a brownfield appears in a few cases. We find that brownfield included for the operation is present in some cases. And these are, what we're seeing here are just airports, ports, metros, trams, bridges and tunnels, and rail. We also see that trams and bridges and tunnels are found, some of the cases are found with a combined construction with another transport mode. We also see that in some cases we have other non-transport related infrastructure included. Another note, just as a note, this is not something we were looking at specifically, was that all ports, as you see, 10 port projects, 10 have equipment involved, and in 8 of the 10 tramways built, they also included urban development. This slide now shows roads. Roads have been a large part of our sample. These include obviously PPPs and publicly funded projects. Doing the same exercise, we'll find that most projects include some commercial activities. These are in practice service stations or other service activities along the alignment of the road. But they contribute little to the overall revenues. They are mostly and many times combined with brownfields. International and national roads are found to be highly including brownfields in the contracts. And then urban development was found only in one case, while a number of these projects include environmental works. Here, we have to make it clear that these findings concern our database. This database is not unbiased. It's not totally representative of what happens out in the real world. This is a convenient sample that has been collected by many partners. So it has some representation, but it's definitely not as representative as one would like to believe. In any case, a brief summary of this quick review of what our cases are like finds that overall there are very few revenue-enhancing features that we have identified in the benefit cases. And here we're talking about cases coming from 22 countries. We find that NOD's infrastructure serving passenger transportation potentially includes commercial activities that may generate revenues greater than 10%. We see in this review that infrastructure totally dedicated to freight that seldomly is bundled with other features. Tramways are commonly combined in their operation with other urban transport infrastructure in operation. Roads have support through small revenues coming from service stations and other support activities for vehicles along the alignment. And what was a dominant feature that comes out very often is that brownfields are usually and mostly existing in road projects. A small further analysis, we've made a number of hypotheses and tested them. Here I'm presenting only 2 of them. Was to say, how do these features perform anyway? One hypothesis was that brownfield sections and road projects improve the probability of achieving demand forecasts and contribute to project performance. The other one which is apparent as well in looking at, was integrating alternative revenue activities such as commercial activities and combined infrastructure development would contribute to performance. What we call performance in the specific testing is meeting test cost targets, meeting time targets, and meeting traffic targets. So when we went in and looked at it, we found that brownfield section does not improve the potential of achieving forecasted traffic. This, in a way, is to be expected since overall traffic, road traffic is affected by similar sources of risk. So the brownfield section of the road will be affected in a similar way. So it does not improve the chances of achieving traffic under adverse conditions. The other thing that came up was that we found that brownfield additions sometimes could support optimistic forecasts. This, in a way, because there's history on the traffic on the brownfield, one probably tends to be more optimistic of what the overall traffic would be with the addition of the brownfield. Another finding is that this approach is obviously common in private financing, so we see it in PPPs. We don't see this combination in most public funded projects. The other basic hypothesis of testing is integrating alternative revenues activities. So as this bundling or this improved value proposition, does it actually lead to better results? Here we have to take into account that we're looking only on 15 projects over 69, and 15 projects in any case are a small number. In any case, the analysis, statistical and qualitative, gave us that there is a positive correlation with traffic forecasts, and that we found nothing to verify that there is a correlation with cost and time. So basically, part of the performance seems to be achieved, traffic, but there is no conclusion as yet with respect to cost and time targets. Another interesting point was that we found no differentiation of how this model, these enhanced models behave if there is private financing of PPP, for example, or public funding of the project. Another important feature was that the capability of the operator is important when we have enhanced transport infrastructure models. Otherwise, we found no correlation, which means if you have a more experienced operator or constructor, it makes no difference, or we found no difference, would be correct, in cases where there was no enhanced model of business model for infrastructure. Well, this became important in the case of more enhanced transport models. Finally, going here, and this is a point to be further researched, is, and we understand it and we've seen it in the qualitative aspects, is that bundling activities, different infrastructure together, commercial activities, development activities, require a more mature institutional environment. This is still to be proven. However, we've seen that looking qualitatively into it in these specific cases, that it took a long time for their maturing. This could be obviously due to many reasons. Larger projects include far more stakeholders, so far more interest involved, but this is to be further researched in the coming activities of benefit. So at this point, I thank you. I would like to say that the business model typology was prepared, developed by us and the University of Twente. Well, the analysis that was carried out was also contributing to the University of Twente, Serema, University of de Las Palmas, Gran Canaria, University of Belgrade, and University of Oulu. So thank you.
So thank you, Athena.
Thank you.
Your sharing of some results and findings was quite interesting. I will remember again that you are free to pose questions whenever you want, and I'm moving the role of host now to Koen to present the implementation context. Koen, the floor is now yours.
Okay.
Not yet.
Wait.
I don't know why. Just a minute.
Hello, are you hearing me? Hello?
Yes, we hear you, Koen. Go on.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, yes. It took a while. Wait, yeah. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, you have now to put in full screen.
Yes, okay. Yeah, I'm waiting for... Okay, is this fine? Can you see the presentation? Hello, can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. Sorry for... Okay. So I will say some details about the implementation context. So the basic idea is that, of course, transport infrastructure projects and the building of contracts, negotiations, the implementation is not done in a vacuum, but it's done in a political, economic, social context. And we try to capture this dimension by including some data on this context. So in the basic model of benefit, it's this upper part in the model. So the idea is that the implementation context influences the business case model or the business model of projects, as well as finance schemes and funding schemes, and by this will influence the performance. So I will first dig into what kind of dimensions we take into account, capturing the implementation context, what we actually mean by it. Secondly, how do countries differ in their implementation context? Here I must say that we only look to European countries. And then a last question, which I will only deal with in a provisional way, is how implementation context impacts upon infrastructure project performance. I will deal with it in a provisional way because the actual testing within the benefit cases still needs to be done, but there is some evidence coming from other research that helps us to frame the hypothesis there. So what is the implementation context? The implementation context is, are you still hearing me? Yes. Okay, sorry, yeah. Okay, so the implementation context, the basic idea is that we try to capture the most important dimensions in a country, which would influence the formation and the implementation of transport infrastructure projects and their performance. We try to do this in a parsimonious way, and this implementation context needs to be or needs to fit both the context of publicly funded projects and privately financed projects. So as well as the traditional procurement, traditional kind of procured infrastructure projects by government, as well as public-private partnerships. And the dimensions that we take along are political, regulatory, administrative, economic, and financial aspects.
we make a distinction between two kinds of implementation context. First, the general implementation context focuses on the political, regulatory, and economic context, which affects all kinds of infrastructure projects, transport infrastructure projects, so both publicly financed and privately financed projects. And in the second instance, we make also specific implementation context for privately funded projects, because governments may do extra efforts to attract and facilitate these privately financed transport infrastructure projects. So what dimensions do we take into account? First dimension in the general implementation context, so which holds for all kinds of projects, publicly funded and privately funded transport infrastructure projects, is the institutional context. And the institutional context is understood in three ways: a political dimension, a legal regulatory dimension, and a dimension of administrative capacity. What we did was to look for existing kind of indicators which are measured already for a long time, for let's say for 15, 20 years, in a similar way, and which are generally accepted by practitioners as well as scientists in that way that they capture the most important dimensions. So for the first element of political capacity, support and policies, we use indicators from the World Bank, the World Governance Indicators, where we measure on the one hand the element of political stability. Political stability measures the perception of several groups about the extent that political instability and politically motivated violence could be possible. Then there's a dimension of control of corruption, so what extent the legal system as well as the political system avoids corruption and bribe. Of course, this is very important for investors in terms of funding and financing transport infrastructure projects. And then there's the last dimension about the possibility for citizens to participate in political decision-making and the accountability of politicians. That last dimension refers, among others, to the extent to which citizens are able to voice their opinion about certain infrastructure projects or other projects. Then the legal regulatory system. And the second general dimension, the rule of law, refers to the regulatory quality, the ability of government to formulate good laws. Regulatory quality refers to this. Rule of law refers to the confidence that respondents have about contract enforcement, property rights, police and courts, that they function well. And then the last dimension of regulatory and legal system is the deregulation of transport markets, where we use OECD data that captures the extent to which transport markets are heavily regulated or deregulated. And then the last dimension would be administrative capacity, where we use a measurement, again from the World Bank, about government effectiveness, meaning the quality of public services, civil service, independence from politicians, and so on. A second general dimension which we measure is the economic financial context, which refers to the macroeconomic situation, and there you see the different elements taken into account, and financial conditions, referring to the efficiency and the trustworthiness of the financial system. Efficiency refers to the availability of financial services, affordability, the ease of access to financial markets, and so on. And trustworthiness refers to the trust people have in the soundness of banks and regulation of securities. All these elements are, of course, very important to stimulate investment in transport infrastructure, because they increase overall trust in the system. Then we take one specific element into account, which we deal with separately, and that is an index constructed by ourselves with colleagues with whom we worked in a cost action, and that refers to similar types of elements like policies, regulatory framework, and administrative capacity, but specifically targeted to facilitate privately financed infrastructure projects, so public-private partnerships. That's about the extent to which there are strategies, programs, political support, to what procurement and specific PPP laws are clear and enforceable, and to what extent support units and standardized procedures and documents are available. Now we first turn to how countries differ in terms of implementation context. And there we see, if we bring we show data for 2001 and 2013. First, data for 2001. On the horizontal axis, we have the economic financial index, which is general, and on the vertical dimension, we see the political, legal, and institutional index. We see that the countries cluster in the upper part of the graph, showing that in most countries there's a medium to high level of political, legal, institutional soundness, and that the economic financial situation is overall quite good. If we bring in the situation of 2013, so after the financial crisis, financial market crisis, we see much larger spread across the table, and we see both a movement towards even better economic conditions as to worse economic conditions. Just to compare two groups, if we look for the group which is high on institutional context and rather high on financial context, we see that in 2001, Switzerland, Norway, Netherlands, Germany, UK, and Finland make part of it. In 2013, we see that this group becomes larger. Sweden joins the group, Denmark, Austria, Belgium, but the UK leaves this group and goes to the middle group. If you look at the other side, where we have systems which are medium on institutional context but low on economic financial index, there we see in 2001 Slovakia, Poland, and Czechia and Slovenia being part, but these countries move out and other countries come in like Serbia, Albania, Greece, which was in the middle group, and Italy is on the border of the economic situation. So there are some shifts, and these are important when we study projects which run through the period of 2001 till 2013, because an increase in political soundness and economic financial soundness, or a decrease in both dimensions, will of course affect the progress of projects, or at least that is the hypothesis. When we go to the specific dimension of governmental support for PPPs, or privately funded projects, there we see, based on the work done by the cost action and our colleagues, that we can see four clusters. A cluster which scores high on all kinds of provisions which are meant to stimulate privately financed infrastructure projects: UK, Netherlands, Denmark, and Belgium. Portugal, Greece, and France are in a group which mainly focuses on legal instruments and support arrangements to stimulate privately financed initiatives. Then we have a middle group with a lot of East European countries, and then we have a fourth group which is rather limited in terms of provisions that they see for privately funded projects. Important is that you have to look to both the combination of general implementation context and the specific implementation context in order to be able to explain the prevalence and the success of privately funded projects. For example, Portugal and Greece are high in terms of the way they stimulate privately financed projects, but in 2013 their economic situation was less good, and so you have some kind of trade-off happening there. Another group is, for example, Switzerland, Denmark, Estonia, which are all quite low in terms of provisions to stimulate privately financed projects, but which are institutionally and economically financially quite sound, certainly at this moment in 2013. So the prevalence and the performance of PPP projects, privately funded projects, will be determined by a combination of the general implementation context and specific implementation context. So there are similarities and differences, and there are shifts over time, as I explained with the figure. Now I will turn to the last element. In what way does the implementation context impact upon infrastructure projects' performance? As I told you before, there is literature, and also in those previous cost action, we noted that stable and supportive political, regulatory, and administrative environment stimulates projects to, in terms of take-up, and also in terms of their stability over time. Also, sound economic financial conditions are supportive for the lifeline or the life cycle of a project. In benefit, we will use a large case data set to combine with these data on implementation context, and we will study how implementation context and shifts over time in this implementation context determines the extent to which business models are affected, financing schemes, and secondly, how performance is affected in terms of in time and within budget delivery. Okay. I think that's my presentation.
We are now reaching almost 1 hour session, but I will still leave some 10 minutes for questions and answers. Please send it through the chat. Meanwhile, I will unmute Athena as project coordinator if she wants to say something during the time that people is still having questions to the chat.
Good morning to all. Thank you for being here. This is a first of a webinar session that TIS is preparing, where we try to share our thoughts and our initial findings with a larger group of people, experts and interested parties in infrastructure delivery. What we have done up to now, as you have seen, is focus on what influences and what is included in every part of this conceptual model, meaning what influences the implementation context, as Koen just described, what is influencing the funding stream, models. Obviously, they combine, and this is a process in the following work of benefits, where all these influencing factors lead to the overall results. The idea is to see which combinations, if they are, could actually lead to better performance.
Okay, thank you, Athena. Please, don't you have any questions?
Right. Daniela, I'm afraid that this is either too complex or too
Yeah.
Or too good.
Okay. If there are no specific questions to our speakers, I would like to thank you all for the participation. To remember that in a few days this session will be available through our benefit website. So I would like you welcome to join me in raising your hand that you have in the menu just behind the screen, raising your hands in a special thanks to our three speakers. I also would like to call your attention that we have other interactive tools in Benefit, and one of them is the discussion corners, where you can post your ideas, your opinions, your agreements or disagreements on the topics that we are discussing. So please visit our website and take part in the discussion corners, and welcome you to join us again by the end of October for a new webinar. So you will receive again new announcements of benefit webinar in the beginning of October. Thank you for taking part in our first webinar, and looking to meet you again soon in other webinar or in any other event where benefit is present. Thank you.